The night in the small mountain town was quiet, except for the gentle sound of wind moving through the trees. Daniel sat alone on the porch of his wooden cabin, sipping a cup of warm tea. He liked nights like this. There was no rush, no noise, only the farce breathing around him. But then, something strange happened. At first, it looked like a shooting star. A bright streak of light cut across the dark sky, moving faster than anything Daniel had ever seen. But it didn't fade like a normal shooting star. Instead, it grew brighter and brighter, until the light was almost blinding. The ground under his feet gave a faint tremble. Daniel stood up, his heart beating faster. The light suddenly changed direction and dove straight down behind the ridge of trees. In the distance, there was a deep, muffled boom, followed by a strange metallic sound, like steel twisting under pressure. That wasn't a star. Grabbing his flashlight, Daniel ran inside, put on his thick jacket, and took the small first aid kit he always kept ready. Years of working as a forest ranger had taught him that when something crashed in the woods, there was a chance someone might be hurt. He didn't know what had fallen, but he couldn't just sit there. He set off into the forest, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. The air was colder now, and a faint smell of something burned hung in it. Daniel knew these trails well, but the further he went, the more unfamiliar the forest felt. The trees seemed strangely silent. No crickets, no owls. After about 20 minutes of walking, he saw a faint glow ahead. Not the soft yellow of fire, but something else, a pale, silvery blue light that pulsed slowly, almost like it was alive. Daniel moved closer, crouching low. When he reached a small clearing, his breath caught. In the middle of the clearing was wreckage. Large pieces of metal bent and broken, scattered across the ground. They were not from any aircraft he recognized. The surface of the metal shimmered faintly, reflecting the light in strange patterns. Small sparks hissed in the air. The smell was stronger now, mixed with something sharp and unfamiliar. And then he saw her. Lying among the debris was a tall figure, unlike anyone Daniel had ever seen. Her skin was smooth and silver-tinted, catching the light as if it were made of liquid metal. Her hair, if it could be called hair, was fine and white, almost glowing in the faint light. She wore some kind of dark suit that was torn at the side, revealing a wound from which a strange shimmering liquid flowed. For a long moment, Daniel froze. His mind told him to turn and run. This was something completely unknown, maybe dangerous. But then she moved slightly, and a soft sound escaped her lips, like a faint cry. She was alive. And she was hurt. Daniel's training kicked in. He stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. Her eyes opened, large, luminous. In a deep shade of violet, she looked at him with both fear and desperation. She tried to speak, but her words were in a language he couldn't understand. Still, he understood one thing clearly. She was in pain. Daniel knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. He pulled off his jacket and pressed it gently against the wound. The shimmering liquid soaked into the fabric, and for a moment he wondered if it was dangerous to touch. But she didn't flinch. She only watched him with an expression that seemed almost surprised. Her breathing was shallow, and every few seconds she winced. Daniel spoke softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. "You're going to be all right," he said quietly. "I'll help you." She stared at him for another moment, then closed her eyes, as if trusting him was her only choice. That was when Daniel heard it, a faint clicking sound in the distance. He turned his head, scanning the shadows at the edge of the clearing. There was movement there, shapes, too many legs for a human. The sound grew sharper, closer. The woman's eyes opened again. She looked toward the sound, and Daniel saw fear flash across her face. She reached out and gripped his arm tightly, her fingers cold but strong. She said something in her language, her voice urgent. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. They needed to move. He slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than he expected, and her body was warm, almost too warm. Carrying her carefully, he moved away from the clearing, keeping to the shadows. The clicking noises grew louder for a moment, then faded as they moved deeper into the forest. The trees closed around them, and the strange silver-blue glow of the crash site disappeared behind the trunks. Daniel's breath came in quick, sharp bursts, but he didn't stop. He didn't know who or what was coming, but he knew they were looking for her, and if they found her, she might not survive after several minutes. Daniel found a hollow in the roots of a massive old tree. It was just big enough for them to crouch inside. He set her down gently, and she leaned against the rough wood, breathing hard. Daniel glanced out through the gaps between the roots. In the distance, shapes moved silently across the forest floor. Their bodies were covered in dark, segmented armor, and their heads tilted side to side as if searching for something. The faint clicking continued, echoing in the cold night air. Daniel held his breath until they passed out of sight. When he looked back at her, she was still watching him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She didn't speak this time. She simply lifted her hand, touching his arm softly. The gesture was small, but Daniel understood it, a silent thank you. For the first time that night, Daniel felt the weight of what he was doing. He wasn't just helping an injured traveler. He was protecting someone from another world, and whatever had brought her here, it was only the beginning. Daniel stayed hidden with the alien woman inside the hollow tree for several minutes. Listening carefully, the strange clicking sounds faded into the distance. But the forest still felt tense and silent. He didn't know how far those creatures had gone, or if they would return. The woman was breathing slowly now, but he could see she was still in pain. The jacket he had pressed to her wound was soaked with a strange shimmering liquid. It looked nothing like blood, yet it pulsed faintly, as if it carried light through her veins. Daniel knew they couldn't stay here for long. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he whispered, even though she wouldn't understand his words. Still, he kept speaking in a calm voice, not for her understanding, but to keep them both steady. When he shifted to lift her again, she made a soft sound and shook her head slightly, as if telling him she could walk. She pushed against the tree roots, trying to stand, but her legs trembled. Without thinking, Daniel moved closer and supported her with one arm. As they stepped out into the night air, Daniel glanced toward the direction of his cabin. It wasn't far, maybe half an hour if they moved carefully. There, he had medical supplies, water, and a place to hide her. The forest path was dark and uneven, but Daniel knew every twist and slope. He kept the flashlight low so the beam wouldn't be seen from far away. She walked beside him slowly, her hand gripping his sleeve for balance. Once, they passed through a patch of moonlight, and Daniel saw her clearly. Her face had sharp, graceful lines, and her eyes, though tired, still glowed faintly. There was a quiet strength in her expression, as if she was used to danger but still unwilling to give up. They hadn't gone far when a faint hum filled the air. Daniel froze and looked up. High above the trees, a dark shape floated. Not a bird, not a plane, but something that moved with an unnatural smoothness. It gave off a dim red light that scanned the ground in wide sweeps. The woman's grip on his sleeve tightened. She whispered something in her language, the words soft but tense. Daniel didn't need translation. The meaning was clear. They had to hide, and fast. He led her off the trail, crouching low as they slipped behind a large cluster of boulders covered in moss. The hum passed overhead, the red light sweeping dangerously close. Daniel held his breath until it faded into the distance. When it was gone, they continued moving, but more carefully than before. Daniel could feel her leaning heavier on him, her steps slowing. She was losing strength. Almost. "There," he said quietly. His cabin's outline finally appeared between the trees, a small, sturdy building made of weathered wood, with a dim porch light glowing like a safe beacon in the night. Inside, Daniel guided her to the couch and quickly fetched his first aid kit. She sat still, watching his every move. He could see she was studying him, perhaps wondering why he was helping at all. He knelt in front of her, opening the kit. "I'm going to help clean the wound," he said softly, holding up a bottle of antiseptic. She tilted her head slightly at the sound of his voice, but didn't resist when he began gently removing the jacket from her side. Up close, The injury looked worse than he thought. The shimmering liquid still flowed slowly, but the edges of the wound seemed almost mechanical, as if parts of her body weren't made the same way a human's was. Daniel pushed away his curiosity. First, she needed treatment. He cleaned the wound with slow, careful movements. When his hand touched the deepest part, she tensed sharply, but instead of pulling away, she looked directly into his eyes. There was something in her gaze, something like surprise. It was as if she didn't expect him to dare touch her injury, as if such closeness was rare among her kind. Daniel didn't break eye contact. "It's all right," he said, his voice steady. He pressed the clean cloth firmly against the wound to slow the bleeding. For a few moments, they stayed like that, his hand keeping pressure, her hand resting lightly on his wrist. Then she leaned back slightly, breathing easier. Daniel quickly made a makeshift bandage, wrapping it around her side. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold until she could get proper care, wherever that might be. When he was done, she touched her chest lightly, then pointed at him. It wasn't hard to guess she was thanking him in her own way. Daniel gave a small nod. "You're welcome," just as the air between them felt calm. A noise outside made them both turn sharply. It wasn't the wind. This was heavier, like something moving through the trees, and it was close. Daniel quickly turned off the porch light, plunging the cabin into shadow. He motioned for her to stay low while he peered out the window. Through the trees, he saw faint red glows, moving slowly, scanning. The same kind of hunters from the forest. They had tracked her here. Daniel's pulse quickened, but his mind stayed focused. They needed a plan, and they needed it now. The faint red glows moved slowly through the trees outside Daniel's cabin. They shifted in and out of view, like restless shadows searching for something or someone. Daniel's breath was steady, but his muscles were tense. He didn't know how many there were, but from the sound of the branches cracking under their weight, they were close, too close. He turned toward the alien woman. She was crouched low behind the couch, her violet eyes fixed on the window. Even in the darkness, he could see the fear in her face. Though she hid it well. Daniel moved closer and whispered, "We can't stay here." He pointed toward the back door. She tilted her head, as if trying to understand, then nodded slightly. The cabin wasn't built for defense. If those hunters found them, the thin wooden walls wouldn't stop whatever weapons they carried. The only chance they had was to leave quietly, slipping deeper into the forest before the hunters realized where she was. Daniel grabbed a small backpack from the shelf and stuffed it with essentials: water, a flashlight, a few protein bars, and the first aid kit. He slung it over his shoulder, then motioned for her to follow. They moved toward the back door in silence. Outside, the forest was dark, but Daniel knew the trails well. The moonlight barely touched the ground, leaving most of the path hidden under a canopy of branches. Perfect for hiding, and for getting lost if you didn't know where to step. As soon as they slipped out, Daniel closed the door quietly behind them. The cold air wrapped around them like a warning. Every sound felt sharper now: the rustle of leaves, the creak of old branches, the faint hum of whatever scanners the hunters were using. They moved quickly but carefully, keeping low. Daniel led her away from the main trail, weaving through narrow spaces between tree trunks. He knew a place nearby that might give them some time. A hollowed-out section of rock hidden behind thick brush. It wasn't much, but it would keep them out of sight. But before they reached it, the clicking sound returned. Daniel froze. It was louder this time, closer. He turned his head slowly, and through the trees, he saw one of the hunters. It was taller than a man, its body covered in dark, shiny armor that caught the faint moonlight. Long, jointed limbs moved in an unnatural way, and its head tilted with quick, jerking motions. From his arm extended a device that glowed with a faint red light, sweeping over the forest floor like a search beam. The alien woman's hand gripped Daniel's sleeve tightly. Her breathing grew faster, but she stayed silent. Daniel's mind raced. They couldn't run. The creature was too close, and sudden movement might draw its attention. Instead, he slowly guided her down behind a fallen log, crouching low until the damp would press against their backs. The red beam moved closer. Daniel could hear the faint hum of the device now, and even the subtle scraping sound of the creature's claws against the leaves. He held his breath, every muscle in his body tense. The beam passed just inches above the log. For a terrifying moment, it stopped, lingering as if it sensed something. Daniel could feel the woman's hand trembling against his arm. Then, slowly, the beam shifted away. The creature let out a low clicking tone, almost like a signal, and began moving again. Its steps faded into the distance. Daniel waited another full minute before whispering, "We have to go. Now." They rose and moved in the opposite direction, slipping through a narrow gap between rocks until they reached the hidden hollow. It was barely large enough for the two of them, but it was sheltered and dark inside. The woman leaned back against the stone wall, breathing heavily. Daniel knelt beside her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't understand the words, but she gave a small nod in the dim light. Daniel saw that the bandage on her side was stained again. He opened the first aid kit and began adjusting it. She winced slightly when he touched the wound, but didn't pull away. Instead, she watched him closely, her expression thoughtful, almost questioning. "Who are they?" Daniel asked quietly, even though he didn't expect an answer. But to his surprise, she lifted her hand and traced shapes in the air, a small circle, then a larger one surrounding it. She tapped the larger circle twice, then drew a jagged line through it. Daniel didn't understand the details, but he thought he caught the meaning. The hunters were part of something bigger, something organized, maybe a military force, maybe something worse. And they were here for her. Before Daniel could ask anything else, a faint light flickered in the distance, not the red of the hunters, but a pale blue, moving low to the ground. The woman's eyes widened, and she reached for his arm again, pointing urgently toward the light. Daniel shook his head. "Too risky," he whispered. But she insisted, her voice low and urgent in her own language. Something in her tone told him the blue light wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a signal or a beacon. But if they left their hiding place now, they risked crossing paths with the hunters again. Daniel's mind felt like a scale balancing to heavy stones. Stay hidden and risk missing a chance to help her, or follow the light and risk walking into danger. He took a deep breath and looked at her. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go." They stepped out of the hollow, moving toward the faint blue glow. Every step was careful, every sound felt too loud. Daniel's ears stayed tuned for the clicking of the hunters, but the forest was strangely still. When they reached the source of the light, Daniel saw something unexpected, a small, triangular device half buried in the dirt, pulsing softly. The woman knelt beside it, touching it gently with her fingers. The glow changed, becoming brighter. She looked up at him and gave a short nod, as if to say this was important. Before Daniel could ask what it was, a sudden sharp sound split the air. The clicking had returned, and it was close. The clicking sound grew sharper, echoing through the trees like a warning. Daniel's eyes darted left and right, searching for the source. It was close, too close. The alien woman still knelt by the glowing triangular device, her hands moving across its surface with quick, practiced motions. The blue light pulsed faster now, almost as if it was alive. Daniel didn't know what it was doing, but he could feel in his gut that it was important. "We need to move," he whispered urgently. She glanced up, her violet eyes calm but focused. She said something in her own language, her voice low and certain. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This device mattered more than running. He crouched beside her, his attention shifting between her work and the surrounding forest. The clicking was joined by a faint hum, sound he recognized from earlier. The hunters were scanning again. Suddenly, a beam of red light sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the trees. It passed dangerously close to them, illuminating the edges of the clearing. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He reached for the woman's arm, ready to pull her away. But she shook her head sharply and kept working. The device let out a soft chime, and the blue glow expanded into the air above it, forming a faint, three-dimensional image. Daniel stared in shock. It was like a map, not of the forest, but of stars. a cluster of bright points connected by thin lines, with one glowing larger than the rest. The woman touched that glowing point and then pointed to herself. Daniel understood. It was her home. She was trying to send a message. But before she could finish, a loud snap echoed nearby, the sound of a heavy branch breaking under weight. Daniel spun around and saw one of the hunters emerging from the trees. Its tall, armored body moved with a chilling smoothness, and its head tilted toward them, the red scanning light intensifying. "Go," Daniel hissed, grabbing the device and shoving it into his backpack. The woman protested briefly, but he didn't wait. He pulled her to her feet and they ran. Branches whipped against Daniel's face as they darted through the trees. The clicking grew louder behind them, joined by a second sound, more footsteps. Another hunter had joined the chase. Daniel's mind raced through the forest map he carried in his head. There was a narrow gorge ahead, with a small footbridge made of old planks. If they could cross it, they could cut through a steep path that might slow the hunters. "Hold on," Daniel said, steadying her as they climbed over a fallen log. She stumbled once, her injuries slowing her, but kept pace as best she could. Her determination was clear. She wasn't going to let him face this alone. They reached the gorge just as the hunters' red beams flickered through the trees behind them. The bridge swayed slightly in the wind, its ropes creaking. Daniel stepped onto it first, testing the planks. They groaned under his weight, but held. "Come on," he urged. The woman followed quickly, her steps light but cautious. Halfway across, a sharp metallic sound rang out. Daniel turned to see one of the hunters at the edge of the gorge. It tilted its head and stepped onto the bridge, the wood bending under its weight. Daniel's mind snapped to a risky idea. He looked down at the old ropes holding the bridge. If he could cut them, the bridge and the hunter would fall. But that would mean losing their only way back. He pulled the small knife from his belt and slashed at the nearest rope. The fibers frayed quickly, and the bridge jerked to one side. The woman stumbled, gripping the rope tightly. "Jump," Daniel shouted. She hesitated only a second before leaping toward the far side. Daniel followed, hitting the dirt hard and rolling onto his back. The hunter was almost halfway across when the rope finally snapped. The bridge collapsed, and the armored figure dropped into the shadows below with a heavy crash. There was no time to celebrate. The second hunter was still somewhere in the forest. Daniel helped the woman up and they ran again, this time toward the old ranger's trail that curved toward the mountains. After several minutes, they stopped in a sheltered clearing to catch their breath. The woman reached into Daniel's backpack and pulled out the triangular device. She checked it, her fingers moving quickly. The blue map appeared again, but now a new light blinked at the edge of it. She looked at Daniel and gave a small, hopeful nod. "You sent the signal?" he asked, even though she couldn't understand. But the way she smiled faintly was enough of an answer. For a moment, the forest was quiet again. The moonlight fell gently on the clearing, and Daniel could almost believe they were safe. But then, from far away, came the faint sound of clicking, not from one direction, but from several. Daniel looked at her, his jaw tightening. "They're not giving up," he said. She seemed to understand his tone, her expression growing serious. Somewhere above the treetops, a faint streak of light crossed the sky. Daniel didn't know if it was part of her plan or another threat, but one thing was certain. The night was far from over. Daniel and the alien woman stood in the clearing, both breathing heavily. The faint streak of light across the night sky had vanished, leaving only the pale moon above. The hunters' clicking echoes were still far, but growing louder again. They had to keep moving, yet Daniel knew she was exhausted. "We can't run forever," he said softly, more to himself than to her. The woman held the triangular device close to her chest. Its blue glow pulsed faintly now, slower than before. She touched it with one hand, and then, to Daniel's surprise, she reached out and gently placed her other hand against his forehead. "What?" Daniel began, but then it happened. The forest around him blurred and faded, replaced by a flood of images inside his mind. He saw a vast city made of tall, shining towers, their walls glimmering like crystal. Strange ships floated above it, shaped like curved blades. People like her, tall, silver skin, with glowing eyes, walked through open streets filled with light. There was peace, laughter, and music in the air. Then the scene shifted. The sky darkened, and shadows fell across the city. Massive black ships appeared overhead, their shapes jagged and cold. Daniel felt the vibration of heavy weapons firing. Towers crumbled. Streets filled with smoke and fire. The hunters emerged, hundreds of them, their armor gleaming under the burning sky. They moved with machine-like precision, rounding up the people and forcing them into cages of glowing light. Daniel felt a wave of panic, fear, and loss, not his own, but hers. He saw her standing at the front of a group, holding a strange silver staff, shouting orders in her language. Soldiers in her colors tried to fight, but they were overwhelmed. The hunter's leader struck her down, and she fell. The scene shifted again. A ship fleeing into the darkness of space, her face pale but determined. Daniel realized she was the commander of that ship. She had escaped with information, something so important the hunters would chase her even across worlds. The vision ended as suddenly as it had begun. Daniel staggered back. Blinking as the farce returned around him, she watched him closely, as if waiting to see how he would react. You're a leader, he said slowly. You were protecting your people. She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but she seemed to sense his meaning. She nodded once, her expression both proud and sad. Daniel now understood why the hunters were after her. She wasn't just anyone. She carried something they wanted desperately, something worth crossing light years to find. The clicking in the distance grew sharper. Daniel's focus returned instantly. We need to get higher, he said, pointing toward the mountains. If your people are coming, they'll see us better from up there. She glanced at the tree line, then back at him, and gave a small nod. They set off again, moving toward the narrow mountain trail. The climb was steep, and the cold air bit at their skin, but neither slowed down. The forest thinned as they rose, higher, giving them a better view of the land below. Daniel could see faint red lights moving through the trees far behind them. The hunters were spreading out, searching every shadow. After nearly an hour of climbing, they reached a ridge, where an old wooden lookout tower stood. It was abandoned, its wood weathered by years of wind and rain. Daniel tested the steps and found them stable enough. They climbed to the top. From here, the land stretched for miles, the forest a dark sea under the moonlight. The woman took the triangular device from her chest and set it on the railing. Its blue light pulsed faster now. She touched it again, and the star map reappeared. This time, Daniel saw a small golden spark traveling toward one of the stars. She looked at him and smiled faintly. Help was coming. Daniel almost felt relief. But then his eyes caught movement below. At least 3 hunters had reached the base of the ridge. Their red beams scanned upward, moving closer. The tower gave them a height advantage, but it also made them a clear target. Daniel turned to her. They're coming. We can't stay here long. She seemed to understand, her smile fading. She picked up the device and tucked it away. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and placed her hand over his again. Just like when he had first treated her wound. Daniel didn't know why, but the gesture filled him with a strange warmth. Maybe it was her way of saying she trusted him completely now. The clicking sounds grew louder. Daniel's instinct screamed that they needed to move, but before he could speak, a distant hum filled the air. They both looked up. Far above, a faint shape appeared against the stars, sleek, silver, and moving fast. A beam of pale light swept across the forest, and for the first time that night, Daniel saw the woman's face light up with pure hope. Her people were close, but the hunters below had seen it too, and their clicking grew frantic. The silver shape in the sky grew larger with every passing second. Its smooth surface caught the moonlight, and the pale beam of light it sent toward the ground cut through the darkness. Like a lifeline, Daniel could feel the air change. There was a faint vibration, as if the sky itself was humming. The alien woman stood at the edge of the lookout tower, her violet eyes fixed on the approaching craft. Hope radiated from her, but Daniel's focus was on the danger below. The hunters were climbing. 3 of them had reached the rocky base of the ridge, moving with a disturbing, insect-like speed. Their clicking noises echoed off the stone walls. As they began scaling the slope toward the tower, the red beams from their scanning devices swept the rocks, growing brighter with each movement. "They're coming fast," Daniel said under his breath. The woman glanced down and seemed to understand. Instantly, she reached for the triangular device, tapping it rapidly. The blue glow changed to a sharper, more intense light, sending a signal upward to the approaching ship. One of the hunters spotted the movement. It let out a loud, harsh clicking sound. A call to the others, and raised its arm. A sudden red flash lit the rocks, burning into the wooden railing of the tower. The wood hissed and smoked. "Get down." Daniel pulled her away from the edge just as another red beam cut through the air. The smell of scorched wood filled his nose. The hunters didn't stop. Their armored bodies were halfway up the ridge now, their movements smooth and unstoppable. Daniel knew they had minutes, maybe less, before the hunters reached them. His eyes swept the top of the tower. There was nothing to fight with except an old iron rod, probably part of the tower's railing. He grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in his hands. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. "Stay here," he told her, pointing toward the far side of the tower where the wooden floor was thicker. She hesitated, her eyes searching his face, but then gave a small nod. Daniel moved to the ladder, gripping the rod tightly. The first hunter's head appeared over the edge of the ridge. Its glowing red eyes locked on him instantly. Daniel's pulse quickened, but he stood his ground. When the creature climbed onto the platform, Daniel swung the rod hard. The metal connected with the hunter's arm, making a sharp clang. The force made the creature stumble back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it tilted its head and stepped forward again, raising its weapon. Before it could fire, Daniel struck again, aiming at its head. This time, the blow was enough to send the hunter tumbling backward off the platform, its heavy body crashing against the rocks below. There was no time to breathe. The second hunter was already climbing over the side. From above, the hum in the air grew louder. Daniel glanced up and saw the silver ship descending quickly now, its pale beam focusing directly on the tower. The woman stepped into the light, holding the device high above her head. The beam seemed to react to it, growing brighter. The third hunter, still climbing, turned its head upward and hissed. It fired a red beam toward the light, but the shot missed. Daniel struck at the second hunter, forcing it back, but this one was faster. It blocked his swing with its armored arm and pushed him hard against the railing. The wood creaked dangerously under the impact. Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed back with all his strength, shoving the rod upward into the hunter's neck joint. There was a sharp crack, and the creature froze before falling sideways off the tower. The third hunter finally reached the platform, but before it could advance, the silver ship above released a sudden burst of blue light. The beam swept over the hunter, and in an instant, its body stiffened. The creature dropped its weapon and fell, unmoving, to the ground below. Daniel stepped back, breathing hard. His hands trembled, but not from fear, from the rush of everything happening at once. The woman moved toward him, still holding the device. She spoke a word in her language, her voice calm but filled with meaning. Then she reached for his hand and placed it gently against her chest, the same gesture she had used before to show deep respect. The pale beam from the ship expanded, covering both of them. Daniel felt a strange, weightless pull, as if the ground beneath his feet was fading. He looked up and saw the open underside of the ship, its smooth silver surface glowing faintly. They were being lifted. The forest, the ridge, and the fallen hunters grew smaller below them. The cold night air rushed past, and then they were inside, standing in a large, bright chamber unlike anything Daniel had seen before. The air here was warmer, cleaner, almost alive. Tall, silver-skinned figures moved toward them, their eyes glowing softly. One of them, dressed in a long, flowing robe, stepped forward and spoke to the woman in their language. She replied quickly, gesturing toward Daniel. The robed figure looked at him, then gave a small bow, a gesture Daniel wasn't sure how to return. So he just nodded. The woman turned back to him. She touched his arm. her expression serious yet warm, as if trying to tell him something important. Without words, then she smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her since the night began. The ship shifted, and Daniel felt a faint vibration through the floor. They were moving, fast. Somewhere below, the hunters would be searching the empty tower, realizing they had lost her. Daniel didn't know where this journey would take them next, but he knew one thing. The night he decided to help a stranger in the forest had changed his life forever. The silver ship glided through the darkness of space, leaving the blue and green curve of Earth far behind. Daniel stood near a wide viewing panel, staring out at the endless stars. He had never imagined he would see them like this, not as tiny points of light from the ground, but as a vast ocean stretching in every direction. The alien woman stood beside him, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight. She seemed calmer now, her shoulders no longer tense. The wound on her side was covered with a clean, glowing bandage. Her people had treated it the moment they were aboard. Daniel still wasn't sure what would happen next. Would they take him home? Would they even be able to? He had stepped into her world without meaning to, but now that he was here, part of him didn't want to leave so soon. One of the tall silver-skinned figures approached. It was the robed one who had bowed to him earlier. The figure spoke softly to the woman. In their language, their voices calm but carrying weight. She listened, then nodded slowly. When the robed figure left, she turned to Daniel. She didn't speak his language, but she pointed to herself, then to the stars, then to the glowing point on her triangular device. Daniel understood. They were on their way to her homeworld. He gave a small smile. That's where you belong. She studied him for a moment, then took a step closer. She placed the device in his hand, closing his fingers around it. Daniel looked at it in surprise. You want me to have this? She shook her head gently, then pointed to the blue star map that appeared when it activated. A single golden point blinked. Near the edge, she touched it, then touched his chest, as if saying, "This is for you to find someday." Daniel realized what she meant. This device could help guide him, if he ever wanted to reach her world. The thought sent a strange warmth through him. The ship began to slow. Outside the viewing panel, Daniel saw a faint shimmer ahead, like sunlight on water, but hanging in the middle of space. As they drew closer, the shimmer expanded into a wide, glowing ring, some kind of gateway. The woman turned to him again. Her expression was softer now, but there was something behind her eyes, a sadness, as if she knew this was the moment. They would part. Two of the silver-skinned crew members walked toward them. One carried a small, sleek device and placed it gently against Daniel's arm. A faint pulse of light ran through it, and then the crew member spoke a few words in their own language. Suddenly, Daniel heard the woman's voice, not in her alien tongue, but in clear, accented English. "You are brave," she said slowly, as if testing each word. Daniel's eyes widened. You can speak, only for little time," she interrupted gently. "Device gives me your words." She paused, her gaze holding his. "You saved me. You touched my wound, without fear. My people will remember this." Daniel wasn't sure what to say. "I just did what anyone should do." She tilted her head slightly, a small smile on her lips. "Not anyone. Many would run." The ship moved closer to the glowing ring. Daniel felt a faint vibration under his feet. The woman's expression grew serious again. "We send you back now. Safer for you." He wanted to argue, to say he could help her reach her home, but he could see in her eyes that this was final. This was her fight, and she didn't want to drag him deeper into it. "Still," he said, "if you ever need me again, I'll come." He held up the device she had given him. "I have this now." Her smile widened just a little. "Then we will meet again." The crew members guided him to a small platform at the side of the chamber. The woman stepped closer, her hand resting briefly on his chest. The same gesture she had used before, the one that spoke of trust and respect in her culture. "Daniel," she said softly, speaking his name for the first time. "Courage." The word carried more weight than anything else she had said. The platform glowed, and Daniel felt that strange, weightless pull again. The chamber faded from view, replaced by a blur of light. The next thing he knew, he was standing in the middle of the forest near his cabin. The night air was cool, and the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon. He looked up at the sky, but the silver ship was gone. Only the stars remained, silent and distant. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the triangular device still warm in his hand. The forest felt different now, quieter, yet somehow alive with possibility. He knew life would return to normal soon. He would go back to his work, his small cabin, his quiet nights. But now he carried a secret. Somewhere out there, across an ocean of stars, someone knew his name. Someone remembered the night a human touched her wand without fear. And maybe, just maybe, their paths would cross again.